I'm Francesca Maxime.
And I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents.
The miracle of life. A mother and her baby survive against all odds.
A lot of the times I think I would go through this all over again. All of the heartache, all of the pain.
A leading expert sits down to talk about embryo research.
You are making use of fellow human beings at the very earliest stage of their existence.
And prayers for life from a leading Brooklyn activist.
A very small amount of our time is actually involved in politics. Our whole time is involved in the conversion of hearts.
Good evening and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Well, it is just 2 weeks away, the annual March for Life in Washington, D.C. And tonight we're going to take a close look at the issue of life from a few different angles.
Indeed, and we start tonight with a story our Natalia Ortiz brought us last October. Natalia had a chance to sit down with a woman who was pregnant, alone, and thought she had nowhere to turn. She shared her amazing story of survival.
It's an incredible feeling. It's almost like a feeling of disbelief. Is this my child? This is my child.
Sarah Webb's child is 2-year-old Violet. She was born in April of 2007, but Sarah's pregnancy was a difficult one another woman might have chosen to terminate. She discovered she was carrying Violet while in the midst of an abusive relationship, but Sarah didn't have an abortion. Instead, she fled the state where they lived in order to save her life as well as the life of her child.
Even though my parents were supportive, my husband at the time, he knew where they lived, and I knew that that was not a safe place to go.
So Sarah moved to a city where she knew no one. Even though she had a steady job and money in a savings account, she was rejected repeatedly for an apartment.
If you choose life, then you're looking for an apartment or a place to go to. No one wants a single pregnant woman to move in. No one wants to be a landlord to a single pregnant woman. They want to know when they're guaranteed that next rent.
Sarah had exhausted all her options, or so she thought.
And she had just learned of her pregnancy and so wondering what to do. And so when I met her, I just kind of knew right away, she'd be perfect for our maternity home. So I set up an interview and she was accepted, hands down.
Sisters of Life is a religious community in the U.S. dedicated to the protection of all human life. One of their missions is to provide support to pregnant women so that they don't choose abortion.
We were founded in 1991 by John Cardinal O'Connor. And he really just had a vision.
The vision was to end abortion through prayer and fasting. But the sisters are an active as well as a contemplative order, and they encouraged women to see themselves as heroes.
They just really felt like if we were making this decision to choose life, that we were walking in Mary's path. That Mary was also a single woman at that time, and she was going through a difficult time, and she was not exactly looked upon favorably, and so they really felt like we were an image of Mary in a sense.
The sisters too were Marian-like. They nurtured Sarah, comforting her during the most vulnerable time in her life.
Every day that I'd come home, I'd ring the doorbell and they'd say, "Sarah, you're home. Welcome home. We're so glad you're here."
Sarah stayed with the sisters until Violet's birth. A month later, she found a place to live with a friend who moved into town. But she's never forgotten the help she received from the Sisters of Life.
What do you have to say to the Sisters of Life right
now? It's a difficult question. I owe them everything. I owe them my life. We're the reason that we survived this. They're the reason.
And Sarah believes the tough times were well worth it.
A lot of the times I think I would go through this all over again. All of it. All of the heartache, all of the pain, all the suffering, all the loneliness. I'd go through it all again.
Why?
Because the end result is so beautiful and so amazing. I'm in such a better place now than I ever was before, and I'm much more enriched and fulfilled in life.
And Natalia wrote more about Sarah, Violet, and the Sisters of Life over on our blog. Just head on over to currentsny.net and click on Riding the Wave. It's right there in the right-hand side of the screen.
Stay tuned when Currents continues. We have the day's headlines, including a celebration in the streets of East Harlem. We'll take you there and tell you what it's all about.
Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Coming up a little later, we'll introduce you to someone who has dedicated his whole life to standing up for life.
But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. The U.S. Bishops' Conference is launching a campaign for immigration reform. The move comes as the church observes National Migration Week, which lasts through Saturday. The bishops say they'll be sending out at least 1.5 million postcards, encouraging lawmakers to enact humane and comprehensive reform to the immigration system. Brooklyn Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio wrote about the issue in this week's issue of The Tablet. The bishop said, "We must leave the safety of all prejudices and public opinion in order to truly welcome the stranger as Christ has requested of us." Well, as we focus on issues regarding life on today's show, there's a battle brewing between pro-life activists and the organization Planned Parenthood in Houston, Texas. The controversy has to do with Planned Parenthood's plans to renovate a 6-story building and turn it into an abortion clinic. If completed, it would be one of the largest clinics in the nation at 78,000 square feet. Critics are planning a protest of the new facility on January 18th.
Wednesday was a bloody day for Christians in 2 countries. In Egypt, gunmen opened fire outside a church and in a shopping district where Orthodox Christians were celebrating the Christmas holiday. 6 people were killed in those attacks. In Vietnam, the Archdiocese of Hanoi says city police attacked a group of parishioners at a church cemetery. Reports say the police were trying to destroy a crucifix at the cemetery. At least 2 people were hurt in that incident, but nobody was killed. By contrast, it was a day of celebration in East Harlem yesterday. The 3 Kings Day Parade is a celebration of the 3 wise men visiting the baby Jesus. The colorful event is one of the most festive for Hispanics. Our Natalia Ortiz braved the cold temperatures to bring us a closer look.
The Hispanic part of Harlem, or El Barrio, carried on a tradition yesterday that occurs every January 6th. It's the celebration of 3 Kings Day. The festivities began with a breakfast attended by Mayor Michael Bloomberg and other community leaders. Quickly, though, it became an event for those wearing anything but business suits.
Which 3 kings are you?
Gaspar, the friendly king.
Okay.
Jesus Papoleto Melendez has been marching in the parade as one of the kings for 15 years. That's almost half the time the parade's been around.
El Museo del Barrio has been putting on the 3 Kings Day Parade for 33 years now. And though it's a holiday primarily celebrated by Hispanic and Caribbean cultures, people of all backgrounds have made the parade their tradition.
I love the music, me gusta la música también. Todo es bueno, todo es bueno. Me gusta la parada, qué buena, fantástica. Yo vivo en el barrio dominicano. I live in a Dominican neighborhood, and the Hispanic culture and the Latinas, they just love 3 Kings Day, Little Christmas. Yo soy católica también. I'm Roman Catholic, so it has a religious significance to me as well.
And for this El Barrio local, it's a tradition that dates back decades.
Tell me, Jose, how long have you been coming to this parade?
Oh, since 1950s. I live over here on 112th Street in Lexington, and I also here in El Barrio.
For this lady, chosen as madrina or godmother of the parade, the 3 Kings tradition reminds her of a simpler time when Christmas was not all about the gifts.
I grew up with stories about when my mother was a child, how they would go to the park, they would go to Central Park, they would cut grass, and they would fill a shoebox, and they would put it under the bed for the camels, and a little plate of water for the kings, and they would get 1 toy.
For Mariposa and for many, all that's left of the 3 Kings holiday is this parade. It's the one thing they hope to hold on to for generations to come.
Well, stay tuned. There's much more Currents coming up straight ahead.
Just ahead, does embryo research have unlimited possibilities? I talk with someone who thinks otherwise.
This is purely a speculative proposal at the moment because this has never actually been done.
Welcome back to this special edition of Currents, examining issues of life.
We want to bring you now a discussion on science and a subject that's got a lot of people talking. It's embryonic stem cell research. And while advocates say it holds unlimited possibilities, critics say nothing justifies the destruction of human embryos.
One such critic is Father Tadeusz Pacholczyk of the National Catholic Bioethics Center. And I had a chance to sit down with him for a chat last summer. Take a look. Well, we're here with Father Tad, who came up from Philadelphia, and we're talking today about embryonic stem cell research and what the Church's position on that. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be with you.
So, first of all, for those who may not know, explain what exactly embryonic stem cell research is.
Well, this is the proposal to use cells that are derived out of living human embryos. And the embryos must be destroyed in order to acquire these cells. Once you do that, once you destroy the embryo and get the cells, they're called a cell line. Okay. So the root problem here, if you look at it from the vantage point of the moral question, is that you are making use of fellow human beings at the very earliest stage of their existence in this exploitative fashion.
Right. And of course the whole reasoning behind it is for scientific research in order to aid the health of other human beings. I mean, that's the argument.
That's the argument. The proposal is that at some point in the future, these cells might be able to be used for transplantation. Mm-hmm. Now, this is purely a speculative proposal at the moment because this has never actually been done in any humans, and even the animal models that currently exist are rather, you might say, tentative. The results are unconvincing in many of the attempts.
Sure. Okay, so now that we've gotten that part out of the way, the idea of the Church obviously being morally opposed to this is quite clear.
Yes, it is. I mean, it is a recognition that all members of the human family, whether old, whether young, whether in the womb or out of the womb, all of us deserve unconditional protection. And even it goes a little further. You might say the Church recognizes the vulnerability of the youngest members. So we make special provisions to care for children. We protect them in a special way because they can't protect themselves. And when you're talking about embryonic humans, these are the most vulnerable of all and the earliest time point that is under discussion.
Sure. Well, this is definitely a hot topic, and now one that's gotten back into the public forum again with the government and some recent changes that have been made. Tell us a little bit about what the federal changes mean now.
What has happened is the Obama administration has revised the government's stance because under President Bush, there was a very limited number of stem cell lines that were eligible for federal money. What has happened with the new regulations is that it is now possible to get federal money for more lines and for lines that will be prepared in the future, not just for ones that exist currently. And the rules have basically come out and tried to specify some ethical boundaries. So, for example, when parents have embryos that are left over from fertility treatments, they can sign the dotted line, fill out informed consent forms, and donate their own children for research and for destructive research. And this, the protocols for this have basically been worked out in these new regulations. Now, this is kind of a farce. This is kind of a fiction at the end of the day, because I often say to people, this is something like saying, let's not look at the central ethical violation. This is like saying, it's okay to go and rob banks, but whenever you do it, just be sure you sweep up the glass that you broke as you entered the bank. Be sure that you don't harm any of the guards when you tie them up. But stealing the money, oh well, we're not going to talk too much about that. Destroying the embryo, we're not going to talk too much about that. We're going to pretend that that's ethical, and then go on and build up all these other sorts of ethical regulations to surround it.
Would there be less of an issue perhaps if they were only talking about old lines or pre-harvested embryonic stem cells, or do you think that, I mean, that really the thing that's sticking out here now is that it, will apply to the future?
Well, I think there would be less of an issue if the regulations were fashioned similar to the way that they had been under the Bush administration, because there you had a clear cutoff, and it wasn't possible to use federal funds for future stem cell lines. So the problem here now is that the federal government is becoming complicit in the destruction of human beings in the future. Now, it's true that you cannot use federal money directly to destroy the embryo, but once that dastardly deed has been carried out by the scientist using private money, then the cells that are available will be eligible for federal funds. So, you know, federal funding is a huge incentive to researchers.
Absolutely, yeah. Scientists are motivated by that.
Absolutely.
It gives them, you know, money to do their laboratory work, even in this instance. Tell me a little bit about then what the church will do going forward, given this particular announcement and these changes.
Well, Cardinal Regali responded to these new regulations that were released from the Obama administration, and he strongly recommended that faithful Catholics contact their lawmakers and express their displeasure over this, their concern over these widening of the regulations, because this is a lessening of the protections that should exist towards early and nascent human life. So this is the first thing we have to do, is be engaged in the process of assuring that our legal system protects the most vulnerable among us.
All right. Well, Father Tad, thank you so much for being here. We'll certainly look at this in the future and going forward, and we very much appreciate your insight.
Thank you, Francesca. Great to be with you.
Thank you. Father Tadeusz Pacholczyk of the National Catholic Bioethics Center.
Well, stay tuned. There's much more currents coming up straight ahead. Coming up, witnessing for life on the streets of the city.
I don't go to give talks. I say I go to come to teach people how to fish.
And finally tonight, on a special edition of Currents dedicated to life issues, we want to show the story of a man who has dedicated much of his life to bringing about an end to abortion.
He was talking about it even before the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision that made abortion legal in all 50 states. And more than 20 years ago, right here in Brooklyn, he founded the Helpers of God's Precious Infants.
That organization has grown to an international force, and its founder, Monsignor Philip Riley, tells us about it as tonight's eyewitness.
My name is Monsignor Riley. I'm the director of the Helpers of God's Precious Infant, which is a group, a pro-life group that started here in the Diocese of Brooklyn. Its approach is quite different than many pro-life approaches, which are mostly political or activist. They're doing things. We are very small amount of our time is actually involved in politics. Our whole time is involved in the conversion of hearts. And I have found, and I observed with the people who do this, that they themselves have really grown as Christians. They themselves have grown in holiness. That the approach that we use is the realization that the living, risen Christ continues his work through his mystical body. And the people who are giving him permission to do this, to be his instruments, are many people that you would least suspect to be the ones that God would use to change this culture. I have many grandmothers and grandfathers. I have many young women and men who were never married, but have tremendous goodness and potential. I have widow and widowers. So we have married people too, but we have really involved God's people, and they just keep growing in holiness because they're sacrificing their time, not even thinking about themselves any longer. Many people get involved in the Helpers. They were thinking of retiring and going around traveling all over the world, and they end up that they're traveling to abortion clinics on Saturday mornings and even during the week, and they are becoming, in their old age, the father and mother of incredible amounts of young babies, and they're the ones who are assisting. The Helpers all will tell you, almost to a man and woman, that it has been a great blessing to them, as well as to the women and to the children, that they have really found out what it means to be a Christian. A Christian is to have Christ living within you, to bring Christ to the people, to sacrifice, to be a victim with Christ, and in the process of doing this, you start to change the world, or Jesus changes the world through you. I don't have to say anything. I don't go to give talks. I say I go to come to teach people how to fish. I leave behind my fishing rod, my reel, and they go fishing. I go back and I see incredible fish being caught by these people all over the world, and they just getting bigger fish than myself. It's a tremendous, the hand in the work of God is clear. I just try to stay out of his way.
And the next Helpers of God's Precious Infants Mass and Vigil will take place next Saturday, January 16th, at St. John Vianney Church out in Flushing, Queens.
Certainly dedicated his life to this cause.
Absolutely. He's obviously someone who has a passion for life, and is an issue that he holds very dear, as evidenced by the fact that he's dedicated his entire life to it. And
even before Roe v. Wade, you know, he was doing it before people perhaps, you know, were much on board with that, you know.
Right,
and
right.
He certainly, now that it's grown internationally, has influenced people all around the world.
Right, and of course it's a very contentious issue now with the healthcare debate going on, and you know, it's something that an issue that, you know, people on both sides are obviously very passionate about.
Right. And
he's one that's been out there for a long, long time.
And obviously, you know, with the church's teachings, they're trying to not have federal funding of abortion in the healthcare bill, and that continues to be, as you say, very much a part of the continued debate.
Right, and we'll be here to cover the continued debate as well.
We will. Well, that's all for this edition of Currents. Tomorrow it is all about young people. We'll show you what's being done right here in Brooklyn and elsewhere to reach out to them.
All right, well, until then, you can always catch us online. We're over at currentsny.net on the World Wide Web. Well, for all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure.
And I'm Francesca Maxime. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great night.